Okay, my YouTube people. Today I'm going to be working on this Echo Weed Whacker. Try and get the engine running. It's an SRM-2100. First thing I'm going to do is take a look at the carb because I imagine that's all that's wrong with it. There's one other thing I like to check on these and I'll show you what that is. So first thing I'm going to do is take the air filter cover off and you can see that the filter is trashed. Next thing I'm going to do is take the two screws out that hold the carburetor on. Like that. And then the carburetor. So you can see this grommet is kind of busted and gooed up. That's what ethanol gas does to them. You can see that thing looks like chewing gum. So that's going to need to be replaced. And then you also have in the gas tank a filter. That'll need to be replaced. And then you have this vent. This tube here returns gas back to the carburetor. So when you push the primer bulb, and this one's not pushing because I guess it's plugged, you push down, it sucks fuel out of here, goes through a check valve, and then when you keep doing it, it pushes the excess back to the tank. And that's how you get gas up into the carburetor. So I'm going to take the primer bulb off. That'll need to be replaced. And then that just squeezes right out of there. And kind of looks like, yeah, if you could see that, there's a couple of boogers there. They were inside the carb. Now you also have this diaphragm, which I'm sure is in rough condition. There's also something on that diaphragm, like, not sure what that was. And then you have this gasket. Now you have to make sure you spray this out with carb cleaner real good. After I have the carb off like that, I want to take the spark plug out. This is 3/4, and wow, that was kind of loose. Looks like it's running a little bit rich. That could be because the carburetor needs to be rebuilt. The only true way to know if you have a compression problem or not is do a compression test. I've worked on plenty of small two-stroke engines that felt like they had compression and had none. Like 80 pounds isn't enough to run on a two-stroke. I'm going to take off the manifold gasket here. Now I'm going to take off the manifold. And sometimes you just got to give them a little pry off the gasket. The two nuts that came out, they go here and here. So now you can get a much better look at that piston down in there. It's got some black on it. And there it's just kind of dirty. You can always take a screwdriver and very lightly, not to scratch the piston, just rub it along the piston to see how deep those scratches are. And in this case, I'm not really feeling them with the screwdriver. The other thing you can do is if you think you have no compression, you can kind of see if the ring is stuck. You just bring it down here and you give it a little push like this, being careful not to damage it. And you can feel it spring back and forth a little bit. So I know this one's not stuck. The other thing you could do is you can look right down in the cylinder through the spark plug hole. I could see some crosshatch in there and some light piston marks going up and down, but they don't look like they're scratched in. Again, you could take the screwdriver down in here when the piston's down and just lightly rub it along the cylinder and see if any of those marks are grooves, and they're not. The last thing you have to check on these that's pretty important is the spark arrestor. It's a screen that's right under here where it deflects the exhaust out. And if you run them real rich on oil, that'll clog up and they won't run. And they'll also feel like they don't have a compression. Of course, on these, everything's metric, so you have to have metric Allen wrenches. Another way to tell if something's hard to start and somebody's selling it or wanting to give it to you or wanting you to fix it is the cord will be broke. Because it'll be hard to start and they'll be pulling it forever and break the cord. If things are working right, the cords last a very long time. So that spark arrestor is right under this cover, and with all this oil that I see, tends to make me think that it could be plugged. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. I appreciate it. And for the big reveal, somebody took the spark arrestor out of this one. We don't live in an area where that has to be in there. The other way to get a good look at your piston is to remove the muffler, and you can look right in the exhaust port at it also. Again, there's the top of the piston. There's the piston coming up. There's the ring right there. This port has a lot of deposits on it. Makes me think some of them wasn't spinning it up to speed and they were using a heavy mixture. These need 50 to 1. It's also wise to run your weed whacker at full throttle. That way you're burning up the temperature. I can feel that ring moving, no problem. And again, I'll just take the screwdriver, lightly come across that. I can't feel them with the screwdriver, so that's good. I'm going to clean this up real good, rebuild the carburetor, and put it back together. So let's see what that looks like. Decide to take the pull start off so I can show you what that looks like. And that just comes off like that. I'm also just going to take the gas tank off so I can clean everything real good. Okay, now I got the fuel tank off so I can clean it better and clean the bottom side of the engine. Alright, now I'll clean it up and show you what it looks like. To pull the front clutch cover housing, you have to remove the 4 screws that are here. Then it pops off just like that. So I'm glad that I did this because it is really gooed up inside. There's a bearing in here and you want to make sure it spins free and you don't hear any bearing noises. This one is. There's your flywheel here. You can see this is really dusty. This is your clutch here, and with centrifugal force as the motor spins, the clutch shoes come out and grab onto the inside of the housing. You also want to make sure your housing's not real bad shape. This one's in excellent condition. If you're having any kind of spark issue, disconnect this wire to the switch. When you ground this wire, it shuts the spark off. So if you take this wire and it's not touching anything and you still don't have spark, then you have a bad coil, and you just take these 2 screws out. You get a new coil, and when you put the new coil in, you bring it around to the magnets here, and these generally get gapped about 30 thousandths, or the thickness of a matchbook. And if you just put it right over top the 2 magnets and put that matchbook in between, let it come down, and just tighten the screws, that's how you set the gap without having to get a feeler gauge out. This one's fine, so I'm not removing that. Now I'll get it all cleaned up and show you what that looks like. As you can see, I got everything clean. Got the muffler cleaned, the engine's really clean, the cover's clean along where the clutch goes, clean the gas tank real good. So now I'm going to assemble it back together. The one thing I found with this is that all the bolts had some kind of thread locker on them, and I'm going to go back with Loctite. I'm sure you realize these things vibrate really hard, so it's best to have some thread sealer on there. It's best to have some thread locker on them so they don't start vibrating apart while you're using it. The first thing I'm going to do is put the clutch cover on. Has a couple alignment dowels it presses right down on. Now I'm going to just get a little Loctite. Now I got Loctite on them. I'll just turn them in. Now that I have those 4 in, you just want to give it a little turn, make sure nothing's binding. Now that the 4 screws are in, I'm going to turn the engine, but I'm going to put my finger up in here on the other side of the clutch and make sure it's not bound up and turning, and it's not. The way the gas tank goes on is this notch goes towards the engine. Also, when you're putting the gas tank on, you have to make sure these metal inserts are in here or the screws will crush the plastic. Again, got Loctite on them. And now the muffler. I wire wheeled the muffler bolts real good. There's a gasket here I'm going to reuse. Then the shield. There's a gasket on the shield. And now the muffler. I'm going to put one in to hold everything. Now to have the muffler held on, I'm going to put anti-seize on the bolts. This will be the only bolt that I don't use Loctite on. Now the other one. Now a little Loctite on the exhaust deflector screws, and I'll tighten those back down. This just slips on like this. I have Loctite on the bolts. Now I have all those in. Let's give it a pull. Everything feels good, nice and free. Now I'm taking it back apart because I didn't put the cover on. When you're putting the cover back on, the grommet goes here, hold the wire, and now the cover. And more Loctite on the bolts since I wiped it off. Okay, now that I have the cover on, now I'm going to put this guard on. Next thing on the trimmer, I'm going to install this. This was a whole piece I picked up off of eBay. Should be interesting to see whether this fits in the hole or not. It looks a little bigger. First thing you do is you put the filter in, followed by the two hoses. I like to turn it such that this hose with the vent goes where the vent piece goes, so it kind of lines up. So since this is so big and that hole's small, and I have a couple of these, I'm going to make it fit. I'm on it with a micrometer. This one is 0.831. 0.831. And this hole, and the hole's just about at 0.6. I've decided to open it up with a step drill. And if I go to that second to the last step, that's 0.785. And that should be enough that this fits in tight. So I'm going to just drill it out. Now that I have it drilled out, I'll get the plastic that's in it out. Now it's out. Now I'll check the fit. The end of this is 3/4, so I took it out to 3/4. And now it looks like it should fit. Yeah, this is going to fit. So the 3/4 hole was what it needed, and now I'll reinstall the tank and hook up the hoses. Even though I put blue Loctite on these bolts the first time, I'm going to re-Loctite them again. So the vent hose was a little long. I just cut some off, and then it fits up in here just right. The black line is the fuel supply, has the filter on the end in the tank. The yellow is the return. I have the gasket that goes on first. You just line this hole up with the hole in the engine, like that. Now the manifold goes on, and same with this hole. It lines up with this hole and the hole in the block. It also takes two nuts in here. Like that. And I'm going to use these two screws to hold the two nuts in. Again, this hole goes down. I'll hold this like this. I'll put a little Loctite on the screws. Okay, now that the manifold's screwed down, the nuts are captive, and you can take these screws out. The way I get the carburetor on with everything is I take this air filter mounting piece, put the two screws in it, and I put the air filter backing plate onto put the air filter backing plate onto the screws like that. This is for your choke. Now I have the carburetor on. I just take and slide the whole assembly onto the manifold like that and tighten it up. And there you have it. Choke on and off. I also have a brand new air filter. This side that sticks out goes onto the housing. And then the whole thing just sits on here like this. Last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to connect the hoses. The black one is the fuel supply. It needs to be cut about right there. You slip it on the one that's further in. Like that. And then the yellow one's the return, and it needs to be cut some also. There you have the hoses, all on like they're supposed to be. The primer bulb. I'll put the fuel cap back in. Now the spark plug. With the spark plug, I didn't get a chance to pick up a new one. It's a BPM 7A. But for now, I'll just put it in so nothing gets into the cylinder. A 3/4 deep socket tightens the spark plug down, and then the boot back on. Right now it should run with no problem once it gets some fuel. Woo, that's got some compression, especially without a... Oh, whatever. So now I'll just slide the engine back onto the shaft. And you might have to give it a little pull to get it rotating, to get it onto that end, and it did it. Now tighten up the two 8mm screws that hold it on. Now bring the wires around the throttle, slip it in first, and walk it back over here. This ground wire goes right here, so you can ground out the ignition to shut it off. The other wire here goes to the ignition, and that's the wire that you ground, and it shuts it off. Want to make sure when you're adjusting this cable that you have full throttle, and I do there. So that's pretty much the adjustment here. Now you just take and turn the opposite one in to lock it in place. Okay, I have full throttle, and you want to make sure that it's also up against the idle screw, and it is. Now I should be able to put some fuel in it and start it. Alright, now that I have about a half a tank of fuel in it, I want to rotate it over to where the grommet side is. Make sure there are no leaks. And there are no leaks, thankfully. Now we'll start it. Okay, we'll go over the proper way to start a two-stroke. First thing you want to do is you want to press the primer bulb until you get fuel up in the carburetor. And here it comes. Since the whole system's real empty, we'll just give it a minute. Alright, we have good fuel in the carburetor. Now you put it to full choke. Make sure the power switch is on. And you always hold them full throttle. And then you pull it until it pops off. And then you take it to choke off. Okay, from that you can hear that it needs a high-speed idle adjustment. Plus the other thing is I put a whole lot of WD-40 in the cylinder, and I think it needs a spark plug.